On October 5th, the President invited a very large group of physicians to the White House for a Rose Garden ceremony and handed everyone attending a white coat. But their role was limited to applauding rather than actually talking. And tonight will be different because we want to hear the concerns of highly regarded physicians who treat patients every day. When the stimulus legislation was signed into law last February 17th, it provided in part that protocols would be delivered to doctors electronically via computer on what the government deems appropriate and cost-effective care. And beginning in 2014, doctors who are not meaningful users of this new system will face penalties from Medicare and Medicaid. All of the current legislative proposals address the issue of guidelines in some very broad language.
Thank you, Betsy. First of all, there really isn't an average patient. Every person that you see with a medical problem has some unusual or unique characteristic, and this often has to be considered in dealing with the problem.
The central committees that are doing these guidelines cannot possibly have the local knowledge of the patient that the doctor has who's taking care of the patient. So it's an exceedingly bizarre concept that we're somehow going to be practicing better medicine by having a committee make these decisions that we are really best equipped to make ourselves.
I think there are two other problems with guidelines, which is, first of all, even when they're correct, what they do is they tend to forbid better than average medical care. Guidelines are always average medical care. They may help the physician who is not capable of achieving average results, but they tend to cramp the physician who can do better than average.
One of the more common problems that people have as they get older, that's cardiac, is a disease called aortic stenosis. That's a problem that involves the inability of the valve leading out of the big heart chamber to open properly. That puts a lot of strain on the chamber and can create chest discomfort, heart failure, or even sudden death. Well, when somebody is 85, we can relieve that aortic stenosis with an operation with really very acceptable safety, low mortality rates, et cetera, et cetera. We can do that. We can't do that with medication. There is no medication to use to relieve this problem. We can do it with surgery. Surgery is costly. In an 85-year-old, are we doing this to prolong life? I would say not. I would say, however, that if the 85-year-old cannot walk down the street because he or she is too breathless to do so, or has chest pain, or feels lightheaded, or could faint and break a hip walking down the street, then there is really a very good justification for offering the therapy.
That's just exactly what's going to happen. And the example that you give of valve surgery in an 85-year-old is just not going to happen under Ezekiel Emanuel. It's just, he's going to say that that's a non-starter. That person's outlived their useful years, no matter how long they could live beyond that. I think that the guidelines are a fundamental assault on physician autonomy. And there will be in the future guideline doctors, and there will be real doctors.
Americans are being told very frequently this year that they overuse specialists and push up healthcare costs in the process. I'd like to hear from all of you about what you think of this push that's present in every single bill, all 5 versions in Congress right now, a push to redirect resources from the training and reimbursement of specialists to the training and reimbursement of primary care doctors.
Let's talk about specialization for a minute. Let's talk about lawyers. I have a son a lawyer, not all of them are bad. He does healthcare law. Would my son handle a negligence case? He knows nothing about it, he tells me. One of my best friends is a famous trial lawyer. He knows nothing other things except what he does. He's a great specialist on white-collar crime. We don't go to our general attorney when we have a patent problem. But they're telling us to do this now in medicine. We have different types of engineers, even journalists. There's a financial writer, there's a sports writer. Sure, you can get them to learn how to do a quick piece on something. But this is a society of specialization with massive advances. And now in healthcare, we're telling everybody, you just go to the guy who's your general doc, he's going to know everything, and maybe we'll find a specialist for you if the panel decides maybe you're sick enough to need a specialist. It really doesn't make sense at all.
Well, we were training at cardiologists with acute myocardial infarction, but we just sort of gave people more expensive new technology. When you look at the last decade, the inflation-adjusted cost for treating a myocardial infarction in the United States is actually dropped below, it's below the inflation rate. If you have heart failure or a heart attack or acute coronary syndrome in the hospital, you need to be treated by a cardiologist. Study after study shows that. So, this is nothing against general practitioners, but when you're sick, when you have an illness, and you want to have the accurate diagnosis and the most up-to-date and accurate treatment, you want a specialist. We know from the manpower studies at the ACC there aren't going to be enough cardiologists to take care of all the cardiovascular disease in the country, for taking care of me, for instance.
So let me just ask you to clarify that. There is going to be a shortage of cardiologists in the coming decades, right?
Yeah, large scale.
Let me address some of the advances in cancer. Dr. Moses eloquently expressed some of the advances in cardiology. But children, acute leukemia, used to be totally fatal. We are now curing 90% of children with acute leukemia and most of the other pediatric tumors. The hematologic diseases, Hodgkin's disease. When I was in the service, I still remember air evacuating 2 young women aged 29 to Lackland Air Force Base, and they died. They got a good year and a half. We had the first drugs, Velban and nitrogen mustard. Now almost everyone is cured.
I agree with everything that was just said. Dr. Moses' point is absolutely right, which is that specialists do a much better job at taking care of specific problems that they are trained to take care of, and that if internists or general practitioners start to weigh in too much and take over these things, we're going to get worse outcomes.
When you go into medicine, certain people, it's almost like the arts and music. You really fall in love with something, and most people, we didn't look how much money we can make in a specialty. I fell in love with hematology oncology as a medical student, and that's what I was going to do, and I knew I could earn a living, and I wanted to be happy and feel useful, and that's what I wanted to do. And I know so many of my colleagues are the same. People kid me, when are you retiring? I say, all these great advances, like I do a lot of breast cancer. I mean, we're keeping women alive with spread disease 10 or 15 years now with all the new drugs. Some of them may be cured. We take colon cancer with metastatic disease to liver. We operate. We give them chemotherapy and Avastin and all sorts of drugs, and they're alive 7, 8 years later and are probably cured. I mean, I find that very exciting, and that's what I want to do, and the young kids going into oncology do that. I don't think if you told them you can make 15% more in something else, or especially primary care, they're going to want to do that.
What is actually happening with the health reforms is we're going to get plenty of insurance, but no primary care doctors to take care of them and no specialists to take care of them. So it's not an either-or situation. It's neither. There's a shortage of physicians in the United States growing, both primary care and specialists.
The government is in the process of duplicating everything that managed care did for the last 15 years that was reviled by everybody and which we fought very hard to overcome, and which the courts finally said you can't have withholds, you can't deny pay, you can't pay people to deny care, you can't have gag rules.
Yeah.
The government is in the process of doing all of that. Massachusetts is about to establish capitation as the rule of the state. Capitation was the worst thing that ever happened to medical